Undercover Justice, a CEO's Reckoning. The polished glass doors of Elite Motors in Beverly Hills gleamed under the California sun, reflecting the sleek Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Bentleys that lined the showroom floor. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of leather and ambition. Marble floors sparkled, chandeliers cast a soft glow, and every car on display screamed wealth most priced higher than the average American's home. This wasn't just a dealership. It was a temple of exclusivity, catering to Hollywood stars, tech moguls, and old-money families who tossed around six-figure sums like pocket change. But on this particular morning in 2025, the polished facade was about to crack. A woman stepped through the doors, her worn sneakers squeaking faintly against the marble. She wore faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a demeanor that didn't scream money. To the untrained eye, she was out of place, a nobody who'd wandered into the wrong zip code. But this was no ordinary woman. This was Eleanor Hayes, 52, the self-made CEO of Hayes Automotive Group, a powerhouse empire of 12 luxury dealerships across California. And she was here on a mission that could either save her legacy or burn it to the ground. Eleanor had built her empire from nothing, starting as a teenager sweeping floors in her father's auto shop in Oakland. Through grit, late nights, and a refusal to take no for an answer, she'd turned a single used car lot into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Elite Motors was her latest acquisition, a crown jewel in her portfolio. But whispers had reached her quiet complaints from former customers about being treated differently based on their clothes, their cars, or the color of their skin. The rumors gnawed at her. If true, they threatened everything she'd spent decades building, a brand rooted in integrity, respect, and opportunity for all. So, Eleanor devised a plan as bold as it was risky. She'd go undercover in her own dealership, posing as an ordinary customer to test her employees. No designer suits, no Rolex, no Bentley Continental GT. Instead, she dug through her closet for clothes she hadn't touched in years: jeans with frayed knees, a t-shirt from a long-forgotten charity run, and sneakers that had seen better days. She swapped her luxury cars for a 2015 Toyota Camry, reliable but unremarkable, the kind of car that screamed middle class in a place where status was everything. As she pulled into the Elite Motors parking lot, her heart pounded. This wasn't just about customer service. If her suspicions were right, if her staff were discriminating based on appearance or race, it could spark lawsuits, boycotts, and a PR nightmare that would dismantle her empire. But Eleanor couldn't live with uncertainty. She needed the truth, no matter how ugly. The moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The showroom buzzed with activity, salespeople fawning over well-dressed clients, offering coffee and test drives, but Eleanor might as well have been invisible. 3 salespeople stood within 10 feet of her, yet not one acknowledged her presence. They glanced her way, made brief eye contact, then looked away as if she were a smudge on the glass. She stood there for a full 3 minutes, watching the staff cater to others while ignoring her completely. The disrespect was so blatant it stung. Finally, she approached the reception desk, where a young woman named Claire sat, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. Claire's designer blouse probably cost more than Eleanor's entire outfit. She typed furiously, aware of Eleanor standing there, but refusing to look up. After nearly a minute, Claire glanced up with a look so dismissive it could have curdled milk. "If you're here about a job, applications are online," she said, her tone icy, assuming Eleanor couldn't possibly be a customer. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she kept her cool. "I'm here to look at cars," she said politely, her voice steady. Claire's eyes raked over her, from the worn sneakers to the faded t-shirt, and her lips curled into a smirk. "Sweetie, our cheapest car is $40,000. Maybe try the used lot down the street." The word "sweetie" dripped with condescension, designed to make Eleanor feel small. It was a gut punch, but Eleanor wasn't here to lose her temper. This was a test, and she needed to see how deep the rot went. That's when Mark Sullivan, the dealership's manager, swaggered over. At 40, Mark carried himself like he owned the place: slicked back hair, tailored suit, and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He'd built a reputation for charming wealthy clients while dismissing anyone who didn't fit his idea of elite. To him, Eleanor was a nuisance, a threat to the showroom's pristine image. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his tone laced with superiority. as if her presence was a clerical error. Eleanor didn't flinch. "I'd like to see your luxury sedans," she said, her voice calm but firm. Mark's fake smile faltered, replaced by a look of thinly veiled contempt. "Those are for serious buyers with pre-approved financing," he said, emphasizing serious in a way that made it clear he didn't consider her one. He didn't ask her budget or offer to show her the cars. Instead, he was gatekeeping, demanding proof she could afford to even look. The showroom's other customers began to notice. Some stared, their curiosity tinged with amusement, as if Eleanor were a sideshow. The humiliation was deliberate, designed to make her feel so out of place she'd leave. But Eleanor wasn't going anywhere. She walked toward a sleek black Mercedes sedan, its $85,000 price tag gleaming under the lights. She ran her hand along the hood, admiring the craftsmanship. That's when Mark lost it. He stormed over, his face red with outrage. "I'm going to need 3 forms of ID and recent bank statements before we can discuss this vehicle," he barked, loud enough for everyone to hear. 3 forms of ID just to look at a car. It wasn't policy, it was prejudice, plain and simple. Then he called over a security guard, a burly man named Greg, who approached with his hand on his radio, as if Eleanor were a threat. "Just in case," Mark said loudly, ensuring she heard the implication. The final straw came when a well-dressed white man walked in. The staff's transformation was instantaneous. Claire sprang to her feet, all smiles. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Elite Motors. How can we assist you today?" A salesman who'd ignored Eleanor rushed to offer the man coffee and a tour. When the man asked about the same Mercedes Eleanor had admired, the salesman grabbed the keys without hesitation. "No ID, no bank statements, no questions." The double standard was so stark it was painful. Eleanor's blood boiled, but she kept her composure. She'd seen enough to confirm her worst fears. This wasn't a one-off. It was a culture of discrimination, and it was happening in her dealership. She walked out, Mark's parting shot ringing in her ears. "Don't come back unless you can afford to shop here." But as she reached the door, she turned, a chilling smile on her face. "Oh, I'll be back," she said, her voice low and steady. The promise in her words sent a shiver through the room. In her Camry, Eleanor let the weight of the experience hit her. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from rage. She'd built her company on fairness and respect, and her own employees were betraying those values. She grabbed her phone and called her assistant, Linda. "They failed, Linda." "Spectacularly," she said, her voice like steel. "Prepare the termination paperwork." This wasn't about a few rude employees. This was systemic, and heads were about to roll. Eleanor Hayes sat in her Toyota Camry in the Elite Motors parking lot, the weight of what she'd just endured pressing against her chest. The showroom's glass walls reflected the California sun, but inside, a storm was brewing, one she was about to unleash. At 52, Eleanor had faced her share of challenges: skeptical investors, cutthroat competitors, and the constant undercurrent of bias as a black woman in a male-dominated industry. But this was personal. Her own employees had treated her like she didn't belong in the empire she'd built from the ground up. The betrayal cut deeper than she'd expected. She gripped her phone, her knuckles whitening as she watched the showroom through the glass. Another customer had just walked in, a young black woman in her late 20s, dressed in a sharp blazer and heels, radiating confidence. Her name, Eleanor would later learn, was Monica Carter, a rising star in tech who'd come to reward her success with a luxury car. Monica carried herself with the poise of someone who'd earned her place, but Eleanor knew what was coming. The same staff who'd humiliated her would do the same to Monica, and she was right. From her car, Eleanor watched the pattern repeat like a sickening rerun. Claire, the receptionist, barely glanced up as Monica approached the desk, her fingers still tapping away at her keyboard. The salespeople, so quick to fawn over wealthier-looking clients, continued their conversations, pretending Monica didn't exist. Mark Sullivan, the smug manager, noticed Monica and sauntered over with that same fake smile he'd used on Eleanor. His body language screamed condescension, arms crossed, head tilted, as if Monica were wasting his time. Eleanor couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. Mark's dismissive gestures, the way he leaned away from Monica, the subtle shake of his head, it was the same playbook he'd used on her. Demands for ID, questions about financing, a thinly veiled suggestion that she try somewhere else. Eleanor's heart sank. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about every customer who'd walked into Elite Motors with dreams of celebrating their hard work, only to be judged by their appearance or skin color. It was about Monica and the countless others before her. She pulled out her phone and started recording, capturing every moment of the discrimination unfolding before her. Claire's eye roll, Mark's patronizing smirk, the way the staff catered to a white couple in designer clothes while Monica stood ignorant was all evidence, a case building itself in real time. Eleanor's rage hardened into resolve. This wasn't a one-off mistake or a bad day. This was a toxic culture, a systemic failure that had festered under her nose, and she'd been blind to it until now. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda, her assistant. Termination papers ready. Legal team on standby. Awaiting your orders. Eleanor's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed 8 words that would change everything. It's worse than we thought. Initiate Protocol 9. Protocol 9 was the nuclear option at Hayes Automotive Group, a last resort reserved for violations so severe they threatened the company's core values. It meant immediate action firings, audits, and a top-down overhaul. It was a signal that Eleanor wasn't just angry. She was ready to dismantle the rot at its roots. She made another call, this one to Daniel Kim, the regional manager who oversaw multiple dealerships, including Elite Motors. Daniel, it's Eleanor. Get to Beverly Hills. Now. It's urgent. Her voice was calm, but the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. Daniel, a seasoned executive who'd worked with Eleanor for a decade, knew better than to ask questions. I'm on my way, he said, his tone tight with worry. As she waited, Eleanor watched Monica endure the same humiliation she'd faced. Mark's voice grew louder, his gestures more aggressive. He pointed toward the door, suggesting Monica leave. Other customers glanced over, some with pity, others with amusement, as if Monica's discomfort were entertainment. Eleanor's grip on her phone tightened. She wanted to storm back in, to stop it right then, but she needed Daniel there. She needed witnesses. She needed this to be undeniable. 20 minutes later, Eleanor stepped out of her Camry and drove away, leaving the staff to think they'd won. Mark probably bragged to his team about handling another problem customer. Claire likely returned to her keyboard, smug in her superiority. Greg, the security guard, might have laughed about escorting trouble out the door. They had no idea the clock was ticking. Eleanor didn't go far. She drove to a nearby coffee shop, where she kept a spare outfit in her car for emergencies: a tailored navy suit, Italian leather heels, and a pearl necklace that whispered understated wealth. In the shop's bathroom, she transformed. Gone was the woman in faded jeans and sneakers. In her place stood Eleanor Hayes, CEO, a force of nature who'd built an empire through sheer will. She looked in the mirror, her reflection a reminder of the power she held and the responsibility to use it. By the time she returned to Elite Motors, the showroom was buzzing with its usual rhythm. Customers milled about, salespeople pitched, and Mark strutted like a king. Eleanor pushed through the glass doors, her heels clicking against the marble with purpose. The air shifted as heads turned. Her presence demanded attention not because of her clothes, but because of the quiet authority that radiated from her. She was no longer invisible. Claire looked up from her desk, her smile faltering as she tried to place Eleanor. The salespeople paused mid-pitch, sensing something was off. Mark, standing near a Rolls-Royce, caught sight of her and frowned. Eleanor didn't wait for him to approach. I'd like to speak to your regional manager, she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the showroom. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Mark's confusion was palpable. Look, lady, I thought we settled this, he said, his tone dripping with the same arrogance he'd used an hour ago. He still didn't recognize her, too blinded by his own prejudice to see the truth standing in front of him. You can't just keep coming back. Eleanor's lips curved into a smile not warm, but cold, the kind that should have made Mark run. Tell him Eleanor Hayes is here, she said. He'll know. Mark scoffed, reaching for his phone. I'm calling the police. But before he could dial, the glass doors burst open, and Daniel Kim rushed in, his suit wrinkled, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air-conditioned chill. Daniel was a seasoned manager, used to high-stakes deals and corporate crises, but right now, he looked like a man staring down a firing squad. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Eleanor, and the color drained from his face. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of respect and terror. "I had no idea you were—" He didn't finish. Mark, oblivious to the shift in power, interrupted, his arrogance sealing his fate. "Hayes? Wait, how do you know this troublemaker?" The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Troublemaker. He'd just insulted the woman Daniel was clearly terrified of, the woman who held their careers in her hands. Daniel's eyes widened in horror, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on Mark. "Daniel, I'd like you to observe how your staff treats potential customers," she said, her voice steady but laced with steel. The words landed like a grenade, and Daniel knew exactly what they meant. This wasn't a routine visit. This was a test, and his team had failed catastrophically. Mark still didn't get it. He opened his mouth, ready to double down. "Ma'am, after your behavior earlier," he began, blaming Eleanor for his own actions. But Eleanor cut him off, her voice low and lethal. "My behavior? Let's talk about behavior." The room fell silent, every eye on her. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out a small business card and placing it on the counter with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot. "I'm Eleanor Hayes, CEO of Hayes Automotive Group," she said, each word deliberate, carving through the arrogance and ignorance that had filled the showroom. "I own this dealership. I own all 12 locations in this state." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's jaw dropped, her career flashing before her eyes. The salespeople froze, their minds racing through every dismissive glance they'd given. Greg, the security guard, looked like he wanted to vanish. And Mark's face crumpled as the truth hit him like a freight train. The silence in the Elite Motors showroom was so absolute it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Eleanor Hayes stood at the center of it all, her business card on the counter like a judge's gavel after a guilty verdict. Her words, "I'm Eleanor Hayes, CEO of Hayes Automotive Group. I own this dealership. I own all 12 locations in this state," hung in the air, each syllable dismantling the fragile egos of the staff who dared to treat her like an outsider. At 52, Eleanor had faced down boardrooms, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, and outmaneuvered rivals who underestimated her. But this moment, confronting her own employees' betrayal, was unlike anything she'd experienced. It wasn't just business, it was personal. Mark Sullivan, the manager who'd orchestrated her humiliation, stammered, his face a mix of disbelief and desperation. "But you can't be," his voice cracked, as if saying it out loud could rewrite reality. He'd spent the last hour demanding IDs, calling security, and throwing Eleanor out like she was a shoplifter, all because he'd judged her by her worn jeans and old Camry. Now, the truth was sinking in. He discriminated against the one person with the power to end his career. His world was unraveling, and it was almost poetic to watch. Claire, the receptionist who'd sneered and suggested Eleanor try a used car lot, looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her desk, her career in luxury retail flashing before her eyes. The salespeople, who'd ignored Eleanor while fawning over wealthier-looking clients, stood frozen, their minds racing through every interaction they'd botched. Greg, the security guard who'd grabbed Eleanor's arm and escorted her out, stared at the floor, his broad shoulders slumped. He'd treated the CEO like a criminal, and the weight of that mistake was crushing him. Daniel Kim, the regional manager, was sweating through his suit, his face pale as he realized the scope of the disaster unfolding under his watch. He'd known who Eleanor was the moment he saw her, and the terror in his eyes was palpable. This wasn't just a bad day at Elite Motors. It was a corporate catastrophe that could ripple across the entire Hayes Automotive Group. Careers were about to end, reputations would be ruined, and Daniel knew he'd be held accountable for letting this toxic culture fester. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, her expression unreadable but her presence commanding. She wasn't yelling or emotional. Her calm was more terrifying than any outburst. "For the past hour, I've experienced the worst customer service of my life," she began, her voice steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "But more importantly, I've witnessed discrimination that goes against everything this company stands for." The words landed like an indictment, and the shame on the staff's faces was unmistakable. Some looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Others fidgeted, grappling with the reality of their actions. Mark, desperate to salvage his job, made a final, pathetic attempt to deflect. "Ms. Hayes, if I had known who you were," he started, his voice trembling with panic. But Eleanor cut him off, her words sharp and final. "That's exactly the problem, Mark. Your respect shouldn't depend on knowing who I am." The truth in her statement was so profound it silenced the room. Mark was admitting he'd have treated her differently if he'd known she was the CEO, but that was the heart of the issue. Every customer, rich or poor, black or white, in a suit or sneakers, deserved the same dignity. Mark's prejudice had exposed his character, and it was lacking. Eleanor turned to Daniel, who looked like he was praying for the floor to swallow him. "Daniel, you've been overseeing this dealership for 6 months. How did this happen?" Her question wasn't accusatory, it was worse, disappointed. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find an answer that wouldn't damn him further. "I'll investigate immediately, Ms. Hayes," he stammered. But Eleanor wasn't interested in promises. She wanted action, and she wanted it now. "Mark Sullivan, you're fired," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Effective immediately. Pack your things and leave." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Mark's knees buckled, his face a mask of shock and denial. He'd thought his charm and connections made him untouchable, but in one moment, his career in the automotive industry was over. His reputation, built on schmoozing rich clients while dismissing everyone else, was in tatters. The other staff watched in stunned silence, realizing no one was safe. Eleanor didn't stop there. "Claire, you're fired as well. Your behavior was unacceptable, and you've proven you don't belong in this company." Claire's eyes welled with tears, but Eleanor's expression didn't soften. Claire's condescension, her assumption that a black woman in casual clothes couldn't afford to shop there, had cost her everything. Her chances of landing another job in luxury retail were slim. Word of this would spread like wildfire. Greg, the security guard, was next. "Greg, you put your hands on me and treated me like a criminal. You're fired, and I'll be reporting your actions to the state licensing board." Greg's face crumpled, his career in security likely over. He'd followed Mark's orders without question, but blind obedience was no excuse for violating a customer's rights, let alone the CEO's. The showroom was a graveyard of stunned faces, but Eleanor wasn't done. She turned to the remaining staff, her voice rising with authority. "This isn't just about one bad day or a few rude employees. This is about a culture that's been allowed to fester in my dealership. That ends today." She announced a complete overhaul, mandatory diversity training for every employee, conducted by outside experts. New hiring practices would prioritize character over polish, with interviews designed to weed out prejudice. Customer interactions would be monitored to ensure no one was ever treated like she'd been. But Eleanor's leadership went beyond punishment. She remembered Monica Carter, the young tech professional who'd been humiliated while Eleanor watched from the parking lot. Monica was still in the showroom, standing near the Mercedes she'd wanted, her expression a mix of confusion and hurt. Eleanor approached her, her demeanor softening. "Ms. Carter, I'm Eleanor Hayes, CEO of Hayes Automotive Group. I saw what happened to you, and I'm deeply sorry. No one should be treated that way, especially not in my dealership." Monica's eyes widened, clearly unaware of the drama that had unfolded. Eleanor continued, "I'd like to offer you that Mercedes at a significant discount, along with a personal apology. This isn't just about making things right. It's about ensuring you know your value as a customer and as a person." Monica hesitated, then nodded, a mix of gratitude and relief washing over her face. It wasn't just about the car. It was about being seen, respected, and valued after being made to feel invisible. Eleanor's actions sent a message. This wasn't just about firing the guilty. It was about healing the harm done and rebuilding a culture that reflected her values. She'd grown up in her father's auto shop, watching him treat every customer with respect, whether they were buying a clunker or a Cadillac. Those lessons had shaped her empire, and she'd be damned if her employees forgot them. As the staff processed the firings and the changes to come, Eleanor's phone buzzed with texts from her legal team and HR department, confirming that Protocol 9 was in motion. Audits would be conducted across all 12 dealerships to root out similar issues. Training programs were being fast-tracked, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination was being drafted. Eleanor wasn't just cleaning house at Elite Motors. She was sending a warning to every employee in her company. Betray the values of Hayes Automotive Group, and you're out. But the day wasn't over. Eleanor had one more move to make, one that would cement this moment as a turning point not just for her company, but for every customer who'd ever felt judged or dismissed. She stepped to the center of the showroom, her presence commanding silence. Customers, staff, even Daniel Kim watched, sensing something monumental was coming. For 30 years, I've built this company on one principle, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Judge people by their character, not their appearance. The words resonated, a reminder of what mattered in a world obsessed with superficial markers: clothes, cars, skin color. Today, I saw a character revealed. Some of you chose prejudice over professionalism, and you're paying the price. But for those of you who stay, know this. Every customer who walks through these doors deserves respect, not because of who they are, but because they're human. The speech was a masterclass in leadership, blending accountability with inspiration. It was a call to do better, to be better, and it left no one untouched. Customers nodded, some visibly moved. The remaining staff stood straighter, their fear giving way to resolve. Even Monica, clutching the keys to her new Mercedes, looked at Eleanor with something like awe. The Elite Motors showroom, once a glittering shrine to wealth and exclusivity, now felt like a courtroom after a guilty verdict. Eleanor Hayes stood at its heart, her tailored suit and commanding presence a stark contrast to the woman in faded jeans who'd been thrown out hours earlier. At 52, she'd seen her share of battles: hostile takeovers, economic downturns, and the subtle slights of a world that often underestimated her as a black woman. But this battle, fought on her own turf, was different. It wasn't just about her. It was about every customer who'd been judged, dismissed, or humiliated in her dealership. And Eleanor was determined to make it right. The firings of Mark Sullivan, Claire, and Greg had sent shockwaves through the staff, but Eleanor's announcement of a cultural overhaul was the real earthquake. Mandatory diversity training, new hiring practices, and monitored customer interactions weren't just policies, they were a declaration that Hayes Automotive Group would not tolerate prejudice. The remaining employees, still reeling from the morning's events, exchanged nervous glances. Some felt shame for their silence. Others feared their own actions might come under scrutiny. But all of them knew one thing: Eleanor meant business. Daniel Kim, the regional manager, stood off to the side, his face a mask of dread. He'd overseen Elite Motors for 6 months, and while he hadn't directly discriminated, his failure to address the toxic culture made him complicit. Eleanor's question, "How did this happen?" still echoed in his mind, a reminder that his job hung by a thread. He approached her cautiously, his voice low. "Miss Hayes, I take full responsibility. I'll ensure this never happens again." Eleanor's eyes met his, sharp and unyielding. "You'll do more than that, Daniel. You'll prove this dealership deserves to stay open." Her words weren't just a challenge. They were a lifeline. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. He knew he'd be under a microscope, but he also saw an opportunity to redeem himself. Eleanor wasn't firing him yet. Instead, she was giving him a chance to rebuild what he'd let crumble. It was a testament to her leadership: punish the guilty, but empower those willing to change. As the showroom slowly returned to its rhythm, customers lingered, drawn by the drama and Eleanor's speech. Some whispered among themselves. Others approached Monica Carter, who stood near her new Mercedes, keys in hand. Monica's experience being ignored, questioned, and dismissed mirrored Eleanor's, but her interaction with the CEO had transformed her day. The discounted car was a gesture, but Eleanor's personal apology had restored her dignity. Monica caught Eleanor's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Eleanor nodded, a flicker of warmth breaking through her steely resolve. But Eleanor's work wasn't done. She'd seen the bigger picture while recording Monica's treatment from the parking lot. This wasn't one bad manager or a single rude receptionist. It was a systemic issue, a culture that had taken root because no one had challenged it. And if it was happening at Elite Motors, it could be happening at her other dealerships. That thought chilled her. She'd built Hayes Automotive Group on the values her father instilled in her: treat everyone like they matter, but somewhere along the line, those values had been eroded. She stepped outside to take a call from her legal team, who were already drafting a company-wide memo about Protocol 9. "We're auditing all 12 locations," her lead counsel said. Training programs are being scheduled, and we're reviewing hiring records for patterns of bias. Eleanor listened, her mind racing. Good, she said. I want reports on my desk by next week. No one slips through the cracks. The lawyer hesitated, then added, This could get messy, Eleanor. Lawsuits, bad press, she cut him off. Let it get messy. I'd rather lose money than my principles. Back inside, Eleanor noticed a small crowd gathered near the showroom's coffee bar, where a few customers were talking animatedly. One, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, approached her. Ma'am, I saw what happened. I've been coming here for years, and I never realized. He trailed off, embarrassed. I should have said something when I saw how they treated that young lady. Eleanor studied him, recognizing the guilt in his eyes. You're saying something now, she said. That's a start. Next time, don't wait. The man's honesty sparked a ripple of murmurs among the other customers. A woman in her 60s spoke up. I felt judged here too, not for race, but for not looking rich enough. I almost stopped coming. Her admission opened the floodgates. Another customer, a Latino man in his 50s, shared how he'd been asked for extra ID when buying a car, despite having perfect credit. The stories weren't loud complaints or lawsuits waiting to happen. They were quiet truths, the kind that festered in silence until someone like Eleanor forced them into the open. These confessions fueled Eleanor's resolve. She realized this wasn't just about Elite Motors or even her company. It was about an industry and a society that too often judged people by superficial markers. She'd seen it her whole life. The raised eyebrows when she walked into a boardroom, the assumptions that she couldn't possibly be the boss. But she'd always fought back, not with anger, but with excellence. Now, she was fighting for more than herself. She called Daniel over. I want a town hall meeting for all employees, every dealership, every level. Next week. We're addressing this head-on. Daniel nodded, scribbling notes. And I want customer feedback portals on our website by tomorrow, she added. Anonymous, no barriers. If people feel mistreated, I want to know. Daniel's eyes widened at the timeline, but he didn't argue. He knew better. As the day wore on, news of the showdown at Elite Motors began to spread. A customer had recorded part of Eleanor's speech on their phone, and the clip was already circulating on social media. Hashtags like Elite Motors Reckoning and Eleanor Hayes trended locally, with comments ranging from praise for Eleanor's leadership to outrage at the staff's behavior. Some called for a boycott. Others vowed to support Hayes Automotive Group for its accountability. Eleanor's PR team was scrambling, but she wasn't worried. She'd always believed transparency was the best defense. Let the world see the truth, face it head on. By late afternoon, Eleanor was back in her Camry, driving to her office in downtown Los Angeles. The suit and heels were gone, replaced by comfortable slacks and a blouse. She didn't need the trappings of power to feel it. The day's events had reminded her of that. Her phone buzzed with a text from Monica. Thank you for what you did. I'll never forget it. Eleanor smiled, a rare moment of lightness in a heavy day. Monica's gratitude wasn't just personal. It was a reminder of why she'd taken this risk. At her office, Eleanor met with Linda, her assistant, who'd been coordinating with HR and legal all day. The terminations are processed, Linda said, handing her a stack of documents. Mark's already called twice, begging for a second chance. Eleanor shook her head. No second chances for that kind of behavior. He made his choices. Linda nodded, then hesitated. What about Daniel? He's beating himself up. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, considering. Daniel gets a chance to prove himself. But he's on notice. The conversation shifted to the broader fallout. The audits would take weeks, but early reports from other dealerships suggested Elite Motors wasn't an isolated case. Subtle biases, longer wait times for certain customers, assumptions about budgets had crept into other locations. It wasn't overt like Mark's actions, but it was insidious, and Eleanor was determined to root it out. This isn't just about firing people, she told Linda. It's about building something better. We owe that to our customers, our employees, and ourselves. As the sun set over Los Angeles, Eleanor stood at her office window, looking out at the city she'd conquered. She thought of her father, who'd taught her that a business wasn't just about profit, it was about people. Today, she'd honored that lesson, but the work was far from over. She'd exposed a flaw in her empire, and now she had to fix it, not just for her company, but for every person who'd ever been made to feel less than. The road ahead would be tough legal battles, public scrutiny, internal resistance, but Eleanor was ready. She'd built an empire from nothing. She could rebuild its soul. Eleanor Hayes stood at the window of her downtown Los Angeles office, the city skyline stretching before her like a map of her triumphs and trials. At 52, she'd built Hayes Automotive Group from a single lot in Oakland to a network of 12 luxury dealerships, a testament to her grit and vision. But the events at Elite Motors had shaken her, exposing a crack in the foundation of her empire. The discrimination she'd faced, ignored, humiliated, and escorted out of her own dealership wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a wake-up call. Her company, built on her father's principles of respect and fairness, had strayed, and it was her responsibility to set it right. The week following the showdown at Elite Motors was a whirlwind. The viral clip of Eleanor's speech, recorded by a customer, had exploded online, amassing millions of views and sparking heated debates. Some praised her as a hero, a black woman who'd confronted prejudice with unflinching courage. Others criticized her, claiming she'd entrapped her employees or overreacted to bad customer service. The comments sections were a battleground, with users arguing over race, class, and the state of American business. Eleanor didn't engage. She didn't need to. The truth was on her side, and she was too busy rebuilding to argue with strangers online. Her first move was the town hall meeting she'd ordered, held in a cavernous conference center to accommodate employees from all 12 dealerships. Over 1,000 people filled the room: salespeople, mechanics, receptionists, managers, each one aware of the Elite Motors scandal. Eleanor took the stage, her presence commanding silence without a word. She wore a simple black blazer and slacks, no flashy jewelry, letting her words carry the weight. For 30 years, I've run this company on one rule: treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are, she began, her voice steady but fierce. Last week, I walked into Elite Motors as a customer and was treated like I didn't belong. So was another woman, Monica Carter, who deserved better. That's not just a failure of a few employees, it's a failure of our culture, and it stops now. She outlined the changes: rigorous diversity training, revamped hiring, and customer feedback systems. But more than policies, she challenged her team to examine their own biases. You don't get to choose who deserves respect. Everyone does. If you can't live that, you don't belong here. The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Some employees nodded, inspired. Others shifted uncomfortably, knowing their own actions might be scrutinized. Daniel Kim, the regional manager, stood at the back, his face a mix of determination and guilt. He'd spent the week auditing Elite Motors, firing 2 more salespeople who'd shown patterns of bias, and implementing Eleanor's new protocols. He knew his job was still on the line, but he was committed to proving himself. Monica Carter's story became a cornerstone of the overhaul. After driving off in her discounted Mercedes, she'd written a blog post about her experience, detailing the humiliation and Eleanor's intervention. The post went viral, shared by thousands who saw their own struggles in Monica's story. Eleanor invited her to speak at the town hall, and Monica's words were raw and powerful. I walked into Elite Motors proud of what I'd achieved, and they made me feel like nothing, she said. But Ms. Hayes showed me that justice can win. Don't let what happened to me happen to anyone else. Her speech brought tears to some employees' eyes, a reminder of the human cost of prejudice. The audits of the other dealerships revealed what Eleanor had feared. Subtle biases were widespread. At a San Francisco location, minority customers waited longer for service. In San Diego, salespeople often steered lower-income clients toward cheaper models without asking their preferences. None of it was as blatant as Mark Sullivan's actions, but it was insidious, eroding trust one interaction at a time. Eleanor acted swiftly, firing a handful of employees and retraining others. She also launched a public campaign, Respect Drives Us, featuring Monica's story and a commitment to equality. Billboards went up across California, and TV ads aired during prime time, turning a PR crisis into a platform for change. The legal fallout was messy. Mark Sullivan tried to sue for wrongful termination, claiming he'd been set up by Eleanor's undercover stunt. The case was dismissed. Eleanor's recorded evidence and witness statements were airtight, but it fueled online debates about fairness and entrapment. Claire, the receptionist, posted a tearful apology video, begging for forgiveness, but it backfired. with viewers calling her out for only being sorry after getting caught. Greg, the security guard, faced a state investigation into his license, his career in tatters. Eleanor didn't revel in their downfall. She'd wanted accountability, not revenge. But she also knew their actions had consequences, and she wouldn't shield them from that. On a personal level, Eleanor grappled with her own role in the crisis. She'd been so focused on growth, acquiring new dealerships, expanding her brand, that she'd missed the warning signs. Late one night, she called her older brother, James, who still ran their father's original auto shop in Oakland. "Dad would be ashamed," she admitted, her voice heavy. James, always the voice of reason, disagreed. "Dad would be proud you're fixing it, Ellie. You're not just saving your company, you're setting an example." His words steadied her, reminding her why she'd fought so hard in the first place. Eleanor doubled down on community outreach, partnering with local organizations to offer job training for underrepresented groups. She also created a scholarship fund in her father's name, supporting young people pursuing careers in the automotive industry. At Elite Motors, she personally oversaw the hiring of a new manager, a woman named Anita Patel, who'd risen through the ranks at a rival dealership. Anita's no-nonsense approach and commitment to fairness made her the perfect choice to rebuild the dealership's culture. Months later, Eleanor returned to Elite Motors, this time as herself, no disguise, no test. The showroom felt different, warmer. Anita greeted every customer with genuine enthusiasm, and the staff followed her lead. A young couple, dressed casually, was being shown a Bentley without a hint of judgment. Eleanor caught Anita's eye, and the manager smiled. "We're getting there, Ms. Hayes." Eleanor nodded, a weight lifting. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The "Respect Drives Us" campaign paid off. Sales at Hayes Automotive Group rebounded, driven by customers who valued Eleanor's stand. Monica became an unofficial ambassador, speaking at industry events about the need for change. The online debates continued, but they'd shifted from outrage to discussion, with people sharing their own stories of discrimination and calling for accountability. Eleanor's story had sparked something bigger than her companion conversation about dignity in everyday interactions. One evening, Eleanor sat in her office, reading customer feedback from the new online portal. Most were positive, praising the improved service, but a few detailed lingering issues, small slights, moments of oversight. She forwarded them to her team with notes. "Fix this. We're not done." Perfection was impossible, but striving for it was non-negotiable. She thought of her father, who'd once told her, "A business is only as good as the people it serves." She'd lost sight of that, but she'd found her way back. The Elite Motors reckoning wasn't just a corporate cleanup. It was a defining moment in Eleanor's life. She'd faced her company's flaws, confronted her own oversights, and emerged stronger. Her legacy wasn't just the dealerships or the millions in revenue. It was the promise that no one would be made to feel less than in her world. She'd fought for Monica, for herself, and for every customer who'd ever been judged by the wrong measures. And she'd won. As she turned off her office light and headed home, Eleanor felt a quiet pride. The road hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She'd honored her father's values, rebuilt her company's soul, and shown the world what leadership looked like. The scars of that day at Elite Motors would fade, but the lessons would endure. Character matters, actions have consequences, and respect is non-negotiable. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced discrimination or witnessed injustice in your life? How did you respond? And what do you think businesses should do to ensure fairness? Share your stories and perspectives. Let's keep this conversation going.